Welcome, Wargamers, to the super dangerous Gnarlwoods of the Mortal Realms, because today we are talking about the lore from the newest game Warcry, Heart of Ghur, which is sort of the Warcry 2.0 edition that just dropped. There's a lot of really cool story beats here, and one thing I want to emphasize is what we're going to talk about today doesn't just affect the game Warcry. This game is set in the realm of Ghur, which is the realm of beasts, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, which is where the grand overall story for Age of Sigmar is also set right now. So basically, the grand story is in Ghur itself, but Warcry, this new box set that just dropped, is taking one little snippet of that, meaning the Gnarlwood, a forest in Ghur, and magnifying, kind of zooming in. And the reason I point all this out is because the lore that we're going to talk about today doesn't just affect Warcry, is my point. That even if you only play AOS as the main system, you're not interested in Warcry, there's still quite a bit of really cool things to learn about the Gnarlwood, because I'm sure it'll become like an important place later on. Now, one thing I'd like to add up top, if you're interested in this video, in Warcry, any of that stuff, please consider using my affiliate link in the description down below for Not Just Gaming. It's an awesome store here in the US with 15% off all Games Workshop products, which for Warcry specifically ends up being, I think, like $35 off, which is a nice chunk for you. And using that link goes a long way to supporting me, my wife, and this channel, because I get a cut at no cost to you. It's life-changing stuff, and I'm so appreciative to everyone who has used that link. And so let's start our discussion with what we know is going on right now. Obviously, I said that the main story is taking place in the realm of beasts. Orcs are running rampant. Kragnos is now freed from his prison thanks to the Right of Life by Alariel. And there's just kind of a general threat level that keeps kind of being ticked up and up and up. Well, not terribly far from where Excelsis is, the main city of order within Ghur, over to the west, there's actually a forest known as the Gnarlwoods. It's a thick forest, and one thing I want to talk about, this is sort of my overarching introduction to the Gnarlwoods. We're going to have other videos that go into more detail later on, but if you can imagine each realm as having its own type of theme, obviously this is the realm of beasts, everything's going to have a bestial theme. Well, what does that mean for a forest? Well, massive trees, a lot of carnivorous plant life, flora and fauna are both predatory in nature. Also, the trees themselves, the gnarl oaks that make up the forest, rather than being like typical branches, are almost like tightly wound, almost like muscle and sinew. It's almost as if everything's alive, flexing and stretching and trying to kill everything around it. These aren't trees that, like, the branches aren't necessarily whipping around at any given time particularly fast trying to kill you, but if you were to set up camp, the trees would slowly, as the roots kind of moved them ever so slightly towards you, and then kind of encircle you, and then the branches would come down and kind of lock you into a cage, and you'd be slowly consumed by the trees themselves. It's not a violent, quick thing, but the forest itself is predatory. It's choking out the life of anything that happens to come through it and doesn't know how to survive. In fact, one of the fundamental rules of surviving the Gnarlwood is simply, you don't stop moving, because if you stop, the trees will start to kind of coalesce around you and claw you apart. So, you need to have a force, an army that can get into the Gnarlwood and do what you need to do, which we'll talk about why people would go in there in a second, but you have to have a force that can accomplish a mission, but is also small enough and manageable enough to be able to move around the woods at free, pace. They can circumvent some of the dangers that exist there. Not only do you have the dangers of the trees themselves that are everywhere, they make up the bulk of the forest, obviously, but you also have other monsters living within them. You have natural formations like rushing rivers and boulders rolling down hills. Like, it's just a dangerous place to be, period. And then you stack a whole bunch of predatory flora and fauna on top of it, and it becomes a mess. Now, why would people live or go near, for example, the Gnarlwoods? There's a few reasons. One, if you're a small tribe of people and you learn how to navigate the woods safely, meaning, as safe is a relative term given what the state of the realms is like, but if you're able to live peacefully within the Gnarlwoods, they act as a fantastic natural deterrent for enemies. Armies are not going to march through the Gnarlwoods, they'll get murdered. Really, it's small war bands and detachments that can even hope to navigate the woods, or at least survive it on the other end. So if you are a small tribe, it makes perfect sense that you would probably take habitation up in the trees and that kind of stuff and try to just basically stay away from as many predators as possible, but be open to an ever-changing environment where you have to be able to have a fluid society moving from one location to the next. But that's not why the Gnarlwood is the central focus for the latest Warcry game. Put a pause in our story of, exploring this realm. Far up in the heavens, there was a ship known as the Talaxis. This was a Seraphon void ship. They essentially are ships that are piloted and governed by the Slann that can traverse the realms themselves, but don't need realm gates. They can go through space from realm to another. This is how we have the Starborn Seraphon that can teleport down. They're made of light stuff and all the other crazy out there Seraphon stuff that there is. Now, this particular ship was loaded to the gills with important artifacts. Essentially, the Slann in charge of this ship was given his part of the great plan by the Old Ones, and he says, hey, listen, we're going to load you up with all the artifacts that are too dangerous to be kept in the realms, but they might fit into the great plan later on, so we need you to basically act as a bank. You're going to be up in the sky, we're going to drop off artifacts with you, but you're not really going to be a force that goes down and does stuff because we can't risk losing these things. And all of that's perfectly cool. I mean, it fits in with the background of the Seraphon as these ancient protectors and guardians that have a plan for saving the realms. It's a bit vague, they don't fully understand it, but they're all doing a job that they think is adding up to eliminating chaos. And yeah, taking important weapons from the hands of your enemies and safeguarding them is a very reasonable position for a Slann to be in. Well, we don't know what happened to the ship specifically, what went down to transpire. What we do know is that the Talaxis crashed. Something in the sky knocked it out of orbit, or wherever it was doing. I don't know if it was traveling or whatever. It's purposely very vague within the core rulebook of Warcry. Something knocked the ship out of the sky, and as it came hurtling towards Ghur, it crash landed in the dead center of the Gnarlwood. Now, this had a lot of effects. First off, massive impact. I mean, it was a thing that everyone could see. All right, it's a huge ship crashing into a largely open savanna realm. So everyone's just seeing this huge light come out of this forest, and everyone just gets a clear direction. Oh, something cool's happening over there, which, if you're humans, you're like, oh, I wonder what new kind of hell that is. And if you're orcs, you're like, I wonder if there's a fight there. So everyone has a reason to turn the direction of the Gnarlwoods, which I'm sure for the natives who are living there, probably not great to have your location broadcast to as many people as possible. The second thing that it did was it brought all of those cool artifacts and weapons from the heavens down to the realms, perfectly reachable by most armies. Something we'd covered back in the Soul Wars is when all of the Storm Vaults were revealed. This is the thing from the Forbidden Power expansion. Essentially, Sigmar was collecting all these dangerous artifacts, putting them in Storm Vaults, and at one point, because of the Necroquake, all the Storm Vaults are revealed, and now there's this huge rush to go get these arms and armaments that are titanic in proportion. I mentioned in that lore video many years ago at this point, it would be the equivalent as if nuclear weapon caches just popped up randomly all across the world. Yeah, your big players, large countries, first world countries, a lot of transportation and communication stuff, they're going to snag most of them, but those smaller powers that haven't achieved nuclear power on their own are also going to get them. And so the overall threat level of the planet increases. It's the exact same thing here. A bunch of exceptionally dangerous artifacts and weapons just dropped into the heart of Ghur. And every force got to see it happen, and now they all have an opportunity to go see something that their opponent wants. Right? It's not just a matter of if I can use this weapon, if my opponent wants it, I don't want them to have it. So even if I don't know how to use it, I'll keep it. I'll just store it away somewhere. So now we have a dangerous location, and we have an announcement that something important is happening there for everyone to see, and a whole bunch of the most powerful, nasty weapons just sitting there in a ship. It's just there. Everyone knows it. It's right there. But the third thing that this crash did was something a little bit harder to explain. You see, within Seraphon ships, they have these things called world engines. They are essentially terraforming equipment. If the Seraphon want to land their ship and go from being a starborn to a more terrestrial type of Seraphon, again, listen to their lore week for details on how they do that, but they can coalesce and become, meat and blood and all these kinds of things all over again. Well, to do that, normally a Seraphon ship will land, the world engines will kick on, and they'll kind of turn whatever location they happen to have landed in into their preferred natural environment, which is, generally speaking, South American-style rainforest, just like in the old world. Right? Thick, teeming jungle. Well, here's the issue. The Talaxis crashes. The world engines turn on. It's already in a thriving and deadly forest. So what it does is it terraforms that into being more deadly, more terrifying, and a thicker forest that now is meshing the preferred Seraphon environment with the brutal nastiness of life in Ghur. It introduces new life forms, new predators that have just entered the food chain. Trees that were already dangerous are invigorated to move further, move faster, grow stronger. Their bark gets tougher. Like I said, it's that muscle tendon-looking tree, and it's now whipping people as hard as it can. Like, the overall danger of this particular environment just magnified tenfold. Because it's not waiting on natural life cycles to thrive, now it's being constantly blasted by terraforming power. We've been talking a lot about Alario's life magic rituals and how it's invigorating the world. It's kind of that same thing, but specifically for creating deadly, dense forest environments. Now, all of these things go into making one of the coolest, settings for a warband-based game. The most common kind of relation history-wise to this is Wartime. Wartime was a game very similar in terms of warband creation. It's, 5 to 12 fighters in a given area trying to fight for resources. In that case, it was Warpstone. But now we're talking about artifacts. So huge armies, say Stormcast, Cities of Sigmar, any one of the Chaos God specific ones, they want the weapons in there. But the problem is the forest is so dangerous and dense and unpredictable and, quite frankly, changing. Like the trees and everything, it literally moves. So maps are irrelevant here. Armies don't move through those things, so they have to send warbands. Small, you might send 10,000 of them, but they're small little isolated groups of fighters, and you hope that maybe 1 in 1,000 reach the dang ship in the center, can extract something of value, and hopefully make it out. No matter how much you try to slash and burn the forest, the minute you reach the area where the Realm Shaper engines are activated, it's just going to regrow. There's no amount of damage or plague that Nurgle can drop that is going to corrupt and destroy these forests because there's an active engine in there invigorating them. So you have to do it the old-fashioned way. You gotta walk. And what a hell of a walk it is. Now, like I said, we're gonna have other stories that go into the specific locations within the Gnarlwood. This is really just an overall kind of introduction to why this setting is so cool and so important. But another thing to note is that when that ship crash landed, right? We've already talked about the immediate effects on the environment and stuff. This is sort of a side story at this point. When the ship crash landed, the Slann who was in charge of it died. In fact, a lot of the Seraphon who were on the ship insta-killed, but not all of them. We now have a situation where there are Skinks and Saurus warriors of all different levels, because they all have different levels of autonomy and individuality, stuff like that. Well, at all different levels of their society, leadership is broken down. The Slann is the ultimate authority. And as these starborn Seraphon have become coalesced over time, meaning they become physical and tangible, they also begin to take on elements of the realm that they're in, just as anyone does. You always reflect the realm that you're in. So what is a bunch of Seraphon with no leadership in the realm of beasts become? They become beasts. In fact, in the back of the Warcry book, I'm just throwing this out there in case you have no interest in playing Warcry. I just think this is a fun little inclusion. There's actually a narrative campaign arc where you have to fight against feral Seraphon who have no leadership, but now they're in their preferred environment thanks to the Realm Shaper engines, and they're frickin' mad. Crazy mad, not angry mad. They have no greater purpose, no greater mission. All their leaders are dead. They have no idea where they are, no way to communicate with other Seraphon. They're just in their ship, which they recognize as being theirs. They have some semblance of mind, but everything around them is terribly dangerous. The people who reach their ship are enemies by default because they want to take the crap that the Seraphon were meant to protect. So if you see nobody, it's a dangerous, predator and prey, eat or be eaten kind of environment. And the second you see someone who might be a friend, it might be a Cities of Sigmar army who's like, oh hey, we know these guys, we work with them. All the Seraphon that are crazy see is a threat who wants to plunder their vaults, which is not inaccurate. And I love it. I love the idea that like the guardians of this ultimate treasure are just now frickin' insane. And they're made insane by their environment, meaning Ghur in this case. The lack of leadership, they can't discern or communicate with anybody else. And so again, danger just keeps ticking up and up and up. Within the Gnarlwood itself, like Talaxis the ship is in the dead center, basically, for lack of a better word. It's always kind of a changing border situation with the Gnarlwood because they move around, but generally speaking, things grow around it because that's where the Realm Shaper engines are exuding so much power from. But you get this setting where there's a ship in the center, and there's a whole bunch of locations dotted around that are recognizable, so people can, point out some geological features, generally speaking, and kind of aim for those. In fact, a lot of the Warcry narrative campaign stuff is about moving from location to location because nothing stays safe for very long, which is a cool feature. But it creates an environment where there's constant danger from every direction. Natural stuff, other enemies, other warbands. I like it a lot. And so let's kind of take a step back here. Like I said, this is just my introductory video. Why is this so cool? In short, it's the perfect setting for this kind of game. My problem with Warcry being set in the 8 points, which it has been for the longest time, was that not everybody has a reason to go to the 8 points, right? Like, sure, there's some artifacts there, but Archaon scoured that whole place clean. It seemed interesting that you would have non-chaos warbands be there, and then also have huge story beats like Broken Realm series, where huge sections of the book were made up to how do we get an army of order into the 8 points. And we were supposed to have already been doing that at some point with our warbands. Like if you have Stormcast as a warband, how'd they get there? I don't know. They're just in the 8 points. Never sat super well with me. But then when you remove it from like the focus of the Warcry story from the 8 points and you put it into something like this, the Gnarlwood, it is, I say faction agnostic, like nobody owns anything in Ghur. If you do, it's very temporary. And then you give every single army in the game a reason to go to this place. Like it's said multiple times in the core book for Warcry, it's the ultimate danger, but also if you get there and you get an item, artifact of some kind, which multiple armies have, it is so massive. Like it is the ultimate reward for the ultimate risk. Figures in what we would know as Cities of Sigmar history have been immortalized by trying to traverse, set up base camps, map the Gnarlwoods, make it to the actual ship itself, take artifacts. Like there's a whole industry that's based upon being an explorer of this intensely dangerous place, and every army has a reason to go there. There wasn't some big necessary cache of weapons or something like that in the 8 points. It was a general open setting. But this is not. We have a singular point that everybody wants to reach. Of course, with artifacts and debris all around it, there's a lot of different things to explore within the Gnarlwoods. It's a huge place. But the ship itself is, of course, the main, it's the big pot of candy at the end. Every army wants to reach it. And every army is going to send stuff because there's no reason not to. Because you can't move a whole army in there. So yeah, I can spare 15 guys. Go into the Gnarlwoods, see what you can find, kind of a deal. Every army, it's a price that every one of them would happily pay to get one of these things. And for that reason, I like it as a setting because, like I said before, everyone has a reason to go there. It's dangerous to everyone. Like the same threats present itself to every army equally, which is not something I could necessarily say for Warcry in the 8 points, because the second a Varangard shows up, everyone snaps to attention. All the Chaos Forces would be behind them. It doesn't make sense for them to fight someone who works for Archaon. My point is, everyone is out for themselves here. Even warbands from the same army are now having to compete with one another, no matter how good they are, because resources are so limited here, and things are so dangerous that there is a mandatory cap on how big a faction can be and still be friendly with another, because at a certain point, if your soldiers are getting fed and your opponents or another guy from your same army is not, they're going to take what you have. Equal threats, equal prizes, I like it a lot. Plus, they've created an environment where, because of the nature of Ghur and its ever-changing qualities and how, entire land masses will move to consume another one, they can constantly be adding and updating stuff to the Gnarlwood, and it won't sound incongruous. Like, it always fits. It always makes sense. So overall, I think it's a very strong setting for the skirmish-style game, just from a logical perspective of massive armies wouldn't be there, but small warbands from every faction absolutely would, which is the test that the initial Warcry failed to me. But then you just get to see the realms going wild, right? What flora and fauna can look like in these outrageous places, being stimulated by all kinds of alien technology and stuff. It's just this perfect confluence of like fantasy, weird stuff, acid trips, and space lizards. You know what I mean? You just throw it all in a pot, you shake it together, and boom, there you go. You got yourself a stew going. And that's the biggest one to me. We can explore the minor details. They're going to matter more for people who play Warcry more than anyone else who plays AOS. But as an overarching idea for how it fits into the Age of Sigmar universe, keep in mind that, like, Excelsis is on one side of the continent. This is on kind of the other, right? Excelsis would be on the east coast. This would be on the west, sort of. And what if you're in Excelsius and you see the ship go down and you know that all the things that you need are there? Right? Like, the weapons you need, the edge you need to survive in such a hostile environment is there. Of course you would keep sending troops in. Of course, it just makes sense. It's right there. Go get the gun, right? So to speak. Get onto the Seraphon ship and get the weapons. The Seraphon want to reclaim their artifacts and get all this taken care of, but the natural environment and the brokenness of the Seraphon who remain mean it's just as much a threat to them, even though they have a personal stake in it. So it creates this situation where every faction has a reason to be in Ghur, fighting, because that's obviously the main chapter of what we're doing in Age of Sigmar right now. But there's always this little asterisk of like, well, maybe if we sent more troops into the Gnarlwood, they could give us something that gives us an edge. And that can drive some leaders crazy. The idea that our next big push or our unfair advantage is just right over that ridge if we just went there. And they send in warband after warband after warband, and you can bleed an entire army dry if you're not careful about it. And so those things are always happening in the background at the same time as the main story of Age of Sigmar is going down with Kragnos running wild all across Ghur. All those things are happening too. And so to me what it does is it just adds a little bit more depth to the overall what's happening in the realms. Now, how come Kragnos can't just walk through the woods and grab the biggest, bestest artifact from the Seraphon ship that he wants? I don't know, but, I'd like to see it. Write me a book about it. But all in all, I think it's a really cool setting, and like I said, we're going to be exploring it a bit more. I just wanted to get a video out there because I was just reading this and I was so very excited about the concept. I love the idea of like these artifacts being found. I mean, much in the same way as you can find random stuff all over Mordheim back in that game. There's an exploration side of this that makes it very enticing for me as a player, being like, oh man, I get to explore all different locations within the Gnarlwood. I'm sure more are coming out with different expansions. It's just very exciting. And the fact that it fits into a greater context of Age of Sigmar as a whole, I thought was a lot of fun. So let me know your thoughts on the Gnarlwood. I would love to read about them. Thank you so much, Games Workshop, for sending me an early copy of Heart of Ghur. We're going to be talking a lot about the various warbands that come in there, the Horns of Hashut and the Rotmire Creed, I believe they're called, along with their backgrounds and stuff. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. Let me know. And I will catch you next time in our next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.